Welcome to Holts Academy's Intermediate Rhino and T-Splines for Jewelry tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll talk about a few of the topics we're going to cover in our short course here at Holts Academy, in particular how Rhino and T-Splines can be used in jewelry design and manufacturing processes. In this particular tutorial, I'm going to use T-Splines in a rather unorthodox way to make a crossover ring with fully controlled symmetry for easier sculpting. So I'm able to grab various faces here and modify them, and the ring will follow. Before we get started, I want to make it rather clear that I'm assuming you're already comfortable with the basics of working in Rhino itself. You know how curve creation works. You also understand commands like revolve, polar array, and shear. In addition, I'm also assuming that you've spent some time with T-Splines already. You understand how the manipulators here and the various grip modes work, so that you're already ready to go for the basics of this. If there are any questions about any of those particular tools, such as the basics for T-Splines or the basics for Rhino itself, you can find some tutorials at cadjewelleryskills.com which can show you some of these basics. Now that that's out of the way, let's start with a new file. I'm going to start with the basic standard profile we use for jewelry here in Rhino, the small objects millimeters template. And I'm going to start with the same thing I start for any sort of basic ring design. I'm going to start with a ring circle in the center of the work area here. And I'm going to set just a diameter of whatever ring size I want to work with. For simplicity, I'm going to use 18 millimeters and just type that in and press enter. I'm also going to start with a stone. Rather than actually walking through the entire section of how to do this, I've actually already demonstrated this in an earlier tutorial. I'm just going to go ahead and make a basic gemstone shape and revolve it using the revolve command from the surface menu. You see your axle in the same view as your cross section, and go and click on full circle. I'll then make sure that this stone is put on a different layer. As you'll see in a minute, this organization is going to make a big difference in our ability to work here. And while I'm at it, I'll also make the stone a bit smaller. I'll scale it down so that I'm dealing with maybe 5 mil should be fine. I want to move it up so that I have at least a full millimeter clearance from the finger hole to the stone. While I'm at it, I'm also going to take the ring circle and put that on a different layer as well. Put it on green. Just right-click on the layer and go to Change Object Layer. If you don't know how to get this layer screen up, you just simply click on the layer cake here. All right, now we have those lines. On a third layer, I'm going to set my active working layer to the red layer now by just either double-clicking on the name or clicking on the green tick here, or the little black tick here. And I'm going to draw a series of line templates as if I'm making a kind of radial grid. This is going to help for lining up the shape I'm going to be making in a minute here. So I'll make one line. The negative x-axis is fine. And I'll go to the transform menu and find the polar array command. My center of polar array will be right in the middle here. My number of items, I'll type in 24. My angle to fill will be 360 degrees. If it already says it in the brackets, I can just press enter to keep. And that will give me 24 lines going around the circle. Once that's done, I'm going to set my active layer to the black default layer, and I'm going to lock all three of these layers so that I can see it, but I can't affect it. Now that we have the template set up for what we're going to work towards, my next bit is I'll want to actually turn on the T-Splines. Now, if you don't already have the T-Splines menu up, you can access it by going to the T-Splines pull-down menu under Utilities and finding the Load Toolbar. You can also always type in TS Toolbar into the command prompt, and that will give you this menu here. Now, there's many different ways of setting this up and working with this. For the sake of simplicity here, and because I have to jump around between commands so often, I just leave the All Command menu open. You can size this however you like, make it whatever size is necessary to keep it out of the way. And once you have this, you have every single command anyway, so you don't really need this anymore. And as and when we can actually turn on the edit mode, which gives us the grips and manipulators. Okay, so to start with here, once we have this basic shape, we're going to make ourselves a T-Splines box. So I'll go to the box command, and I'm going to actually do this without any snaps. For the moment, I don't actually need them. I'm going to be working completely freeform. You see why in a minute. Now, once I have the length and width set in the front view, now you notice I am working in the front view to start with this. I'm going to go to the top view to set the height, and I am going to be picky about the height. This is going to be the width of my ring. So I'm thinking 3 millimeters, and that will give me a 3 millimeter shape. Now, once I've made that basic shape, I am going to turn the grid snap on to line it up so that it's sitting on the middle of the line here. If the grid is not cooperating and not giving you the exact control you'd like, you can always go and right-click on Snap and go to Settings. And we can go to the grid under Document Properties here and change the snap spacing to 0.5. This means we'll be snapping to not just the squares in the grid. I'll turn off the edit mode here for T-Splines. I can actually move it in between squares in the grid as well. That allows me to get my box centered. That's going to be important in a little bit. Okay, now that we have this shape, turn on the edit mode again. I'm also going to set it to box mode rather than smooth mode. The reason being is it's going to be easier to grab the points. We're not so worried about how smooth the shape is to start with. The moment, what we're mainly interested in is actually getting the points in position. So I'm then going to switch to vertice grip. Now there are hotkey shortcuts for these, which are worth considering. If the hotkeys are on, you have A, S, D, and F will actually cycle through the grips. This will save you some time. And W, E, R will cycle through the manipulators. So that can save you an awful lot of time. For the rest of this exercise, I'll actually be mentioning what command I'm using and what grip I'm using, but I'll try to use the hotkeys to sort of speed things up a bit. So we'll start with the pressing A for the vertice grip. I'll bring up the little vertices on this. I'll select the top 3, and I'll switch to W for the move. And I'm going to use, the straight arrows for movement, or I can use this disc for just direct positioning. So I'm going to get these first 3 into position here. So that's top one. I'm aiming for 2 steps away on my little radial grid. And I'm going to grab the middle one, and I'm going to move this one 1 step away. Now I'm lining it up to the center because I'm about to switch to E for rotate. And I'm going to rotate it so that these 3 points sit on this line. Grab the next set and rotate those. So this will give me the nice starting point for the shape, and then we'll start building from here. From here, I'm going to add on additional sections of this T-spline shape. So I'll do that by switching to the face grip. I can do that by pressing the D command. That'll give me that, and I can do that by also switching to the W for the move. Now, if I were just to move this, it would just move the line, which I don't necessarily want. I'll do that. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Alt on the keyboard while I start dragging this disc. And you'll notice what it's doing is it's actually extruding the shape and making a duplicate. So I'll do that a couple more times to get my shape all the way up to the top here, until it starts to become rather awkward to control. I'm actually going to overshoot the mark as well by 2 more shapes. As we start going around, it gets nearly impossible to control. I'm not so fussed about that because I'm actually now I'm going to switch to the vertice grips and also the rotate command. And so I'm now going to rotate and position these. If need be, we can always jump back to the move. And so we'll jump back and forth between them. This is the reason why we have the various commands. I overshot the mark, I'll hold down Control and drag a box like that. So these hotkeys will save you an awful lot of time in moving these shapes around. The thing about T-splines is so heavily involved in sculpting that you're going to be using the same commands repeatedly over and over again just to shuffle things around. And there we have it. So we've taken the top edge there and lined them up. Now we'll do the other side, switching to face grips again, grabbing those bottom faces and dragging them out. What I've done to keep this tutorial from getting too long is I've skipped ahead a bit. I've done the bottom half of the ring using the same method I did the top of the half, making sure each one of these sets of vertice points is lined up along one of these radial axis lines I've set up. Okay, now that we've done this, I can actually go back to using this in smooth mode finally, so we can take a look at this ring we already have. Now this is going to be eventually a crossover ring, so the top and bottom are going to kind of cross over each other on either side. So I need to get the top bit angled correctly so that it actually crosses over to one side. Now in order to do that, I need to get all these points and all these sections up here moved over so that we have space for the other side to be symmetrical. There's many ways I can go about doing this. I would recommend going about, you could actually do the slow way, which would be to move each segment or each section of segments one at a time, and that would technically work. But what I'm going to do instead to save time is I'm going to select all these shapes, or all these vertice points here, and I'm going to turn off hotkeys temporarily. You'll see why in a minute. And I'm going to type in shear. You can also find it from the transform menu here, the shear command. And I'm going to place 2 points on the grid here. The grid snap will help me. And I'm going to slant it out. And the effect of this will be to clear this entire side of the band in one fell swoop without having to worry about any sort of roughness of the shape itself. From here then I can now go back to using the grips and the manipulators and even the hotkeys to shuffle the shape around piece by piece. I'll get more back to that in a minute. Mainly right now what I'm interested in is getting the shape in position and getting the basics of the shape, and then we can go about actually adding some more sophisticated things onto it. So what I want to do now is I want to create some symmetry. So I'm going to switch to face grips, and I'm going to grab those bottom faces, the very tip here. I can actually click again on the translate here to turn it off, and you'll see I've grabbed those end faces, and I'm going to delete them. This will now leave me with an opening on the end. Now, I want to be very sure that this opening is along the vertical axis here, the z-axis, and is as flat as possible so that the 2 edges match up. In addition, I want to make sure that this shape here, this opening, is centered and symmetrical as close as we can get it. One thing that can help with this is the set point command. So I can grab these points here, and again, I can turn off the hotkeys, and I can actually type in set point. Now, I have to turn off the hotkeys to actually type in anything in the command prompt because these override anything that happens up here in the command prompt. So press enter to use set point. And now I can choose which axes I want to line up. If I lined up all 3, all the points would come together at the center of the universe. I don't want that. I only want to line up this direction, which is the x-axis direction. So I'm just make sure I'm setting x. This means I can set all these points to the same line and level. So this saves me a lot of time for getting things precise. Now that we have that line set up, we're ready for symmetry. So I can switch to object grip here for this whole shape. And the best place to look for symmetry here would be under the T-Splines menu, T-Spline object, add symmetry. Now we have an option here for add or discover. Discover I might cover in a later tutorial. This has to do with finding symmetry in existing objects. Add allows us to take half an object and create new symmetry. Now I want to use either axial or radial. Axial would be like using the mirror command. One side would affect the other. Radial, however, does it in a circle. So that's what we're going to try now. And I want to make sure I'm using only 2 segments. If I need to, I can click on this and change it to 2. And then I'm going to set my center of rotation to be right in the middle of the ring here. In this case, it might actually be a good idea to consider with a project snap-on using maybe the end or the mid-snap to find that point there. And my first reference point will be going straight up, and my second reference point will be going straight down. If we did our set point properly, and well is set to yes, then the 2 shapes will be combined together, and you'll see a symmetry line running through the middle of your piece. Now, any change that I make to the shape, such as if I go back here to the vertice control, and I grab some of these points, will happen to, let's grab some better points than that here. Let's just go from this view here. There we are. Now I can grab them, and one side will move with the other. So I can grab these points here, and I can move them down. And so from here, it's only a matter of picking the points you want to move, manipulating them, until we get exactly the shape we want. What I've done then is I've skipped a bit. There's an awful lot of sculpting that can be done. You could spend hours on this conceivably. Mostly what I did was I grabbed faces and I could do things like extrude, so just taking the shape here and just holding down Alt and dragging with the move manipulator. Or I grabbed faces or surfaces or curves and shuffled them around until I got the shape I liked. Another thing you can also do to the surface as well, might be interesting, is to grab one of these curve seams or the whole edge segment set, the whole loop, and I can apply a crease to it that adds a bit of extra level of sophistication to the shape itself. Gives you a little bit of an idea just how far we can push T-Splines and just how complex this program can really become. For more information on courses for T-Splines for Rhino or our Intermediate Rhino course, visit holtsacademy.com.